Well, we have finally come to our last two classes to talk about the cards that are rotating out of standard with this next coming Hearthstone year. So we have to talk about Warlock and Warrior, which is going to be really interesting because honestly, the Warlock cards, two of the sets losing cards, but one almost entire set essentially had no cards used. So we'll talk about that. And for Warrior has been at a pretty low point in the meta in terms of popularity and win rate for quite a while now. So I'm really curious to take a look at these and talk about what the rotation will look like for Warrior. So let's jump in to Warlock cards. And of course, we have to start with the quest line and the hero card, of course, because quests and heroes are rotating out. So the Warlock quest, Demon Seed, rotating out. Now, this hasn't been used for quite a while now. It did get hit with a couple of different nerfs, as well as some of the kind of support cards for that quest line, quest style Warlock deck. Early in its time, and for several metas, the Demon Seed and a couple different variations of Questlock were used and were very popular. It was one of the strongest quest lines when this United in Stormwind expansion first launched. Our hero card for Warlock here, Tamsin, Dreadlich Tamsin, also very, very strong. Very popular card. It's been used in a lot of Warlock archetypes and has been used pretty consistently throughout its time in Standard. Off and on in aggressive decks, but still even fantastic in aggressive decks because of that extra draw. And one of the best hero powers in the game, drawing you a card, even if you take damage. Well, no longer a problem with Dreadlich because then you no longer take that damage for drawing a card, and you potentially get an extra minion out of it. 3 cards here that were also very used in the quest deck: Unstable Shadow Blast, this Bristleback, and the Baron's Scavenger. All 3 of these cards were really, really heavily used in that quest deck. The Unstable Shadow Blast to be able to kill off a low health minion and take damage to the hero to progress the quest. The Bristleback and the Baron Scavenger were really there to help support after the Warlock dug through their deck quite a bit. The Bristleback giving back some of that health after trying to do damage to complete the quest. That Baron Scavenger, kind of a soft heal in a way, but putting up a taunt, decent sized body, that you could pay only 1 mana for. All very, very highly used support cards in that quest Warlock. Stealer of Souls, we definitely have to talk about that, and that D6 Warlock, people remember that deck, and Altar of Fire. Now, Altar of Fire was used in a couple of different varieties of Warlock, but it never really did kind of seem to stick around for very long. That Stealer of Souls, though, was a huge, huge part of that D6 Warlock and really made it possible to progress the quest and do other things. So that was used very heavily for a short period of time as well when that deck was popular. Then another couple of cards that were used in both Questline Warlock and even in just kind of other control, slower style variations of Warlock over the time in Standard have been Shadowblade, Slinger, the Anetheron, and Entitled Customer. The Slinger was really especially used in that quest deck where you were already planning on taking damage and then could capitalize on a very effective single target removal. And of course, that Entitled Customer and Anetheron really capitalized in Questline and other control variants where you would have a large hand size, but that Anetheron especially very used early in that quest variation. Now, these next 3 often ended up being used in the same decks, and they were used in multiple decks. Honestly, regardless of if it was like an aggressive imp Warlock or a slower variation of Warlock, these were used, and that is Tamsin Rome, Grimoire of Sacrifice, and Touch of the Nathrazim. These cards, being shadow spells, worked really, really well with Tamsin. They were low cost, so it was fairly easy to play the Tamsin, play these, and then be able to repeat that spell for the 0 afterwards, or to save that for another turn. But these cards used in tons of different Warlock decks. Now, these next several also used in a couple different decks, that Questline deck, and even more recently, things like the Mine Warlock, but the Runed Mithril Rod used quite often in those Warlock decks that wanted to draw and be able to play quite a few cards, and also Wicked Shipment. Again, that tradable effect that is leaving, whether it's actually using the imps for something like the Curse Imp Lock or using it to cycle with that tradable, there was a lot of versatility with that one as well. And then these last two are the only ones from that Fractured and Alterac Valley, that third expansion, other than the hero card, that really saw any play in Standard outside of pretty fringe cases. So let's talk about Full-Blown Evil and Tamsin's Phylactery. Now, of course, Tamsin's Phylactery really kind of actually allows for a huge OTK burst style combo with things like the Mind Lock, or in the past it was like the Owl that was used. But that Full-Blown Evil also kind of used a bit over its time in a couple of different decks just to help with additional removal and stall for those Warlock decks. So really kind of a lot of support cards, it feels like, leaving for Warlock. Now, if we switch over and look at Warrior, again, we're going to start with that questline and the hero card. So this questline here, Raid the Docks, or Pirate Warrior, as many people called it, really revolved around playing those pirates, getting to that end game, playing that Rakara, and getting Juggernaut to be able to summon a pirate and equip a weapon every single turn. Very impactful, had multiple nerfs, and cards from the deck nerfed over time as well, which led to it being played less and less. So very impactful for sure. And there's a lot of cards that are going along with it. But before we talk about those, we have to talk about Rakara, this hero card used in a handful of decks over its time, whether it was a more aggressive variation of Warrior or more of a slow kind of control Warrior, or even the OTK Warrior. Rakara was there, being able to equip a weapon and get armor at the same time, along with a lot of the other armor gain that Warrior has, being able to attack into a large minion on the opponent's side of the board and make their large minion hit into their own face, could often end games. And of course, that hero power, being able to potentially kill a minion off and gain armor as well with that honorable kill effect. Now for Warrior specifically, I do want to bring up and talk about weapons, because there's actually 3 weapons that did get use over their time in Standard at one point or another. One of them more often than the other 2, but all 3 of them did actually see play at some point, and they are all rotating. And that is the Whetstone Hatchet, Outrider's Axe, and the Blacksmithing Hammer. The Blacksmithing Hammer was the one that was used probably the least, but again, as I've mentioned in almost all of these videos, that tradable effect being a huge impact for many decks, and that Blacksmithing Hammer was huge for having that tradable effect and being able to draw into other cards and then later game have a very strong weapon. The Outrider's Axe is the one that's been used the most over a variety of decks, but that, again, that effect of being able to draw, being able to kill something along the way, and have multiple durability for that weapon has made Outrider's Axe feel like a staple in Warrior for quite a while. The Whetstone Hatchet is the one that was used the most in that questline Pirate Warrior, especially after later nerfs. wasn't really used in other decks outside of that, but a huge part of that is that a lot of the pirates and part of that quest also work with that attacking. So a very cheap weapon with a lot of durability to be able to attack multiple times really worked with that questline deck and the pirates extremely well. And some of those pirates that really capitalized on the attacks are Defias Cannoneer and Stormwind Freebooter. Yeah, these are rotating out as well. So no more cannons to your minions or to your face, and that additional attack with the Freebooter. But those aren't the only pirates. A few others here: Harbor Scamp, Cargo Guard, and the Stonemaul Anchorman. All really good support cards as well. The Stonemaul Anchorman able to try to clear up opponent minions, draw a card. The ability to be able to specifically draw a pirate as well, incredibly huge, especially at only 2 mana. And that Cargo Guard with the 4 health, being able to generate armor every turn, created a lot of value for the Pirate Warrior. A couple of removal cards that also saw play: Shiver Their Timbers with that questline Pirate Warrior, and Man the Cannons. Man the Cannons saw play in a couple of different decks just as a little bit of clear, a little bit of a cheap removal, and also could activate frenzy effects, which definitely was a thing for Warrior for a little while as well. And that really also capitalized on Overlord Sourfang, taking advantage of that frenzy effect and being able to resurrect those. But that Man the Cannons was part of this frenzy package often as well. And speaking of that frenzy and more removal, Crash, Lord of Turtling, and Rancor also leaving. Yeah, Crash was definitely part of that frenzy type deck, part of some control variations, especially earlier on. And Rancor also pretty heavily used in more of those slow removal type warrior decks. Conditioning and Rokara, also 2 cards that are leaving that saw some play in various decks. Conditioning, the ranked spell, saw more play early when there was that kind of buff warrior, rush warrior. Rokara saw play even after people started removing things like the conditioning for the hand buff aspect. These next ones that I want to mention, also very impactful, focused on armor and value and removal, but Heavy Plate, Frozen Buckler, and Shield Shatter all leaving. That is a lot of armor gain, a lot of removal, and again, that value from that tradable with the Heavy Plate. All of these cards leaving as well, going to be definitely impacting Warrior going forward. And these last 2 I want to mention were kind of their own combo that were really used for this kind of OTK Charge Warrior, which is Captain Galvangar and To the Front. To the Front used to discount minions, Galvangar being a 9/9 with charge, people being able to use that with Battleground Battlemaster or Faceless to copy and have an additional minion out on the board for huge damage, or potentially even being larger than a 9/9 if there were any hand buffs or anything else going on with the deck. But either way, still a ton of damage there. What do you think of the cards leaving for these classes? Do you think that these are going to hit these classes really hard? Is this going to impact what we're going to see with these classes going forward? Or do you think any of these should be put in the core set? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you so much for checking this out. And if you haven't already, go ahead and make sure that you check out the previous video that I did for Rogue and Shaman, and that will lead you to the other videos as well. Thank you so much for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next one.